tonight. Money is on the way to millions of Californians to help ease the pain of inflation. The stimulus payments are part of the state budget deal just announced last night. The checks are designed as tax refunds. Families could receive up to $1,050 through direct deposits and debit cards. APIX5's Lauren Toms breaks down how it works and spoke to Bay Area families about whether it will actually help.
Barring a refining disruption, I'm hopeful we can get to $3.49 between Halloween and Thanksgiving. He also added that there's an outside chance the national average reaches a low of $3.29. There's no major hurricane in the Gulf Coast or more refinery outages. However, analysts also warned the decline could slow temporarily and even turn higher in some areas like California and the Midwest. Prices were already rising recently in those areas as well. The least expensive states for gas are in the South. Drivers are paying an average of $3.26 for a gallon of gas in Texas and Arkansas, and some states continue to see much higher prices like California, where the average is $5.26 a gallon, and Nevada at $4.84. The U.S. exported nearly 10 million barrels of oil and refined products last week, according to U.S. Energy Information Administration. Exports of gas totaled 1 million barrels a day for the week. Everybody, Joe Biden's new Inflation Act is now offering up to $14,000 in additional financial assistance to many low-income families. There are over 70 Democratic lawmakers that are urging Congress to step up to the plate and pass legislation that would actually prevent a government shutdown. Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act on climate change is helping many Americans reduce their carbon footprint. A key element in that push is offering up to $14,000 in rebates and tax credits for people to make their homes more energy efficient. Those benefits can be used to lower the cost of home upgrades, ranging from installing heat pumps to buying new electric purchases, and like stoves and dryers. About 40% of carbon emissions stems from buildings, and so these incentives can actually help the U.S. achieve its goal of lowering fossil fuel emissions. According to experts, this gives people some very concrete and generous incentives to do that, both in the form of tax credits and direct cash rebates. CBS News has said that it is the biggest federal investment in buildings ever, at least one that is specified for climate change. There are two separate rebate programs. The Homes Rebate Program provides more than $4 billion in states to help residents make their entire home more energy efficient, and the program provides rebate based on the energy savings they upgrade their home in. And now, for instance, homeowners that make changes that cut their energy usage by at least 35% can get up to $4,000 in rebates. That amount is doubled for low and middle income households who can get $8,000 in rebates. High Efficiency Electric Home Rebate Act provides rebate for low and middle income families to electrify their home, like installing heat pumps or electric clothes dryers. The per household rebate is capped at $14,000, and households cannot receive two rebates for the same upgrade. The Homes Rebate Program would cover upgrades from solar panels to new windows that help your home become more energy efficient. The other program designates rebates for specific appliances and purchases and other upgrades. One of the consumers and one of the most appealing rebates is a provision that is offering up to $8,000 for heat pumps, and this provides air and conditioning as heating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in March, the SEC proposed a climate risk disclosure rule that takes a big step toward increasing the efficiency of the economy and of financial markets by requiring companies to inform investors about the climate-related risks that affect their businesses. Now, as part of this rule, the SEC proposes that companies disclose their greenhouse gas emissions, and a company's emissions are classified into three different categories called scopes. So, Chair Gensler, just so we can set a baseline here, let's run through an example. Let's say I'm Exxon. My Scope 1 emissions would be from things like my company's vehicles and methane leaks that occur at the wellhead of the wells that I own. Scope 2 emissions would be those from electricity I purchase, for example, in order to power my operations. Scope 3 would cover upstream emissions from the production of what I buy, like the chemicals I use to refine my oil into gasoline or diesel fuel, and the downstream emissions from what I sell, like the refined gas or the diesel my customers buy at the pump. Do I basically have that right, Chair Gensler?
Yes.
Good. So you need all three scopes, because otherwise a company could just stop doing the filthiest part of their business and hire some smaller non-reporting company to do the same filthy work and then report themselves as greener. So, Chair Gensler, for a fossil fuel company like Exxon, what percentage of their total emissions are Scope 3 emissions?
I suspect you might know that better than I haven't looked, but it's often over half. It could well be. In some companies, I don't know Exxon, some companies it's as much as 90%.
Well, you're close on that last number. According to an S&P Global analysis, about 88% of the emissions of these fossil fuel companies like Exxon are Scope 3 emissions. So, in other words, oil and gas companies have Scope 3 emissions that, on average, as you say, it's about 90% of their total emissions. Now, the rule the SEC proposed in March already gives companies, in my view, way too much wiggle room in disclosing Scope 3 emissions. But evidently, that wiggle room is not enough benefit for Exxon. They and their trade association, the American Petroleum Institute, have been fiercely lobbying the SEC to drop Scope 3 disclosures entirely from the final rule. So Exxon wants to change the SEC proposal so the company would have to tell about emissions when their own work trucks were on the road, but not about emissions from all the other trucks that are fueled by Exxon diesel when they are on the road. Or to say it another way, companies like Exxon don't want to have to tell investors or the public about nearly 90% of their emissions. And if Exxon and the American Petroleum Institute get their way, investors would remain in the dark about how companies would be affected down the line when policymakers get serious about tackling climate change and, for example, put significant restrictions on trucks that are powered by fossil fuels. So, Chairman Gensler, if a company discloses only 12% of their total emissions to investors, do you think that investors have all of the information that they need in order to evaluate whether or not that company is well positioned to succeed in a greener economy with much stricter regulations on emissions?
So I look at it this way, that many companies today are already making commitments about all three of these scopes. More are making commitments about Scope 1 and 2, but many are also making commitments. And our proposal was, if you're making a public commitment about how you're managing it, you ought to measure it, because how do you manage that which you don't measure? And then we also said if it was material, using a Supreme Court test of materiality, that you would have to measure it, but